I still remember the day I packed my bags. My daughter helped me fold my favorite sweater, the one I always wore on chilly mornings with a cup of tea. My son reassured me, saying, "Mom, you'll have everything you need, good food, people to take care of you, no more worries." I nodded, trying to believe it. They meant well. They wanted what was best for me, and at the time, I thought so too. I told myself it was just a new chapter, a fresh start where I wouldn't have to struggle with housework or worry about forgetting to take my medicine. But as I stepped into that nursing home for the first time, something inside me shifted. The air smelled different. Not bad, just unfamiliar. The walls were clean, but they weren't mine. The bed was neatly made, but it wasn't the one I had woken up in for decades. The first night was the hardest. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the distant hum of televisions, the occasional cough down the hallway. It wasn't home. And slowly, day by day, I began to realize I had given up more than just a house. I had given up my choices, my routines, my little freedoms that made life mine. If you're thinking about moving into a nursing home, or if you have a loved one considering it, I want to share with you what I wish someone had told me. Because once you step through that door, life changes in ways you may not expect. Stay with me, and let's talk about the 6 hard truths I learned. Truths that might just change the way you think about this decision. Hard truths about nursing homes. Number 1. The loss of independence is immediate. The morning sun filtered through the blinds, casting soft golden lines across the floor. I could hear faint voices from the hallway, the shuffle of nurses' shoes, the distant murmur of a television playing in another room. The world outside carried on as usual, but for me, something had changed. I sat up slowly, rubbing my hands together to shake off the stiffness that seemed to settle deeper into my bones with each passing day. Back home, mornings had a rhythm, a comfortable familiarity. I would wake up when my body told me to, not when an unfamiliar voice knocked on my door saying, "Mrs. Land, it's time for breakfast." I used to stretch my arms and breathe in the scent of the old wooden floors, warmed by the sun, before slipping on my soft house slippers, the ones my granddaughter had given me last Christmas. Now, the floor was cold linoleum, the slippers weren't mine, and the room, though neatly arranged, felt empty of warmth. I had always been an independent person. I raised my children, took care of a home, managed a career. I cooked meals exactly the way I liked them, never too salty, always with a pinch of my favorite spice. I knew where everything was in my kitchen, the comforting clatter of pots and pans marking the beginning of another day I had full control over. But here, in this place designed for care and safety, control was the very thing I had lost. That first morning, I was eager to start my day on my own terms. I reached for my robe, walked to the bathroom, and freshened up as I had always done. But as I opened the door to step into the hallway, a nurse gently blocked my way. "Oh, Mrs. Land, where are you headed?" she asked, smiling. "Just going for a little morning walk," I replied, already looking toward the courtyard I had seen through the window yesterday. She hesitated. "We have a scheduled walk at 10 a.m. with the other residents, but right now, it's breakfast time." I stared at her for a moment, my mind trying to process what she was saying. I didn't want to eat yet. I wasn't hungry. I had always preferred a later breakfast, a slow cup of tea before anything else. "Can I go outside for just a little bit?" I asked, keeping my voice gentle. She gave me an apologetic look. "We need to keep everyone on schedule, and we like to have someone accompany residents for walks, just to be safe." Safe. I knew they meant well, but in that moment, the realization hit me like a cold wave washing over my skin. I wasn't free to move as I pleased anymore. My day no longer belonged to me. Small decisions, big losses. At home, I never thought about the simple choices I made every day. What time I wanted to eat, when I wanted to rest, whether I wanted to step outside and feel the sun on my face. These were things so natural, so mine, that I never imagined a time when I wouldn't have them. But in the nursing home, even these small decisions became luxuries I no longer owned. Mealtimes were set. The food arrived on a tray, carefully portioned, nutritious but bland. Some days I wanted a bowl of warm porridge, other days just a piece of toast with butter and a bit of honey. But that wasn't how things worked here. If you don't like the meal, we can try to get you something else, but choices are limited, they would say. Back home, if I wanted a snack in the middle of the night, I could tiptoe to my kitchen, open the refrigerator, and find a slice of fruit or a small cup of yogurt. Here, the kitchen was locked after hours. If I was hungry, I had to press a button and wait for someone to come. I didn't want to bother them. I didn't want to feel like a child asking for permission to do something so basic. So I learned to go without. Even what I wore each day felt different. I used to pick my clothes depending on my mood. A soft sweater on days I wanted warmth, a light cotton blouse when I felt cheerful. But here, practicality reigned over preference. "This one is easier to put on," the nurse would say, handing me a loose-fitting top. I wanted to argue that I could still dress myself, that I wasn't helpless. But I saw the way they looked at me, with kindness but also with efficiency. They had many people to take care of, and I was just one of them. Asking for permission in your own life. One of the hardest moments came a few weeks after I had settled in. My grandson, Min, was coming to visit. I wanted to meet him outside, to sit on the bench under the big tree at the entrance, the one that reminded me of the mango tree we had in our old backyard. I asked if I could go outside a little earlier to wait for him. "We have a scheduled group activity at that time, Mrs. Lan. Maybe you can see him afterward." I smiled politely, but inside, I felt something break. I wasn't asking for much, just to sit outside to greet my grandson the way I wanted to. But my time wasn't mine to manage anymore. I waited in the common room instead, watching the clock, feeling like a guest in my own life. The unseen weight of dependence. The days blended into one another. My family would visit, and I would smile and tell them I was doing well because I didn't want them to worry. But in the quiet moments, when I was alone in my room, I felt the weight of dependence settle in my chest. I had never realized how much my independence defined me. It wasn't just about big things like driving a car or managing a household. It was in the little things, the ability to decide when I wanted to take a walk, what I wanted for dinner, how I wanted to spend my evening. Here, those choices had been replaced by routines, helpful, structured, designed for care, but not for freedom. I thought about the stories I used to tell my children, the lessons I tried to teach them about making their own decisions, about taking charge of their own lives. And now, here I was, watching my own life being gently arranged for me by strangers who, though kind, could never truly understand what it meant to wake up one day and realize you had lost control over something so precious. A choice that changes everything. If you're considering a nursing home, I ask you this: are you ready to give up the small freedoms that make your life yours? Because once they're gone, you will miss them more than you ever thought possible. People talk about nursing homes as places of safety, comfort, and care. And maybe, for some, they are. But what no one tells you is how quickly independence slips away. How one day you wake up and realize you no longer move through the world on your own terms. And that, I think, is the hardest part of all. Number 2, the pain of feeling forgotten. The pain of feeling forgotten. I remember the first time my daughter promised she would visit and didn't. It was a Sunday morning, the kind of morning where the sky is bright but not too harsh, and the air carries just a whisper of a cool breeze. The kind of day that used to mean gathering at my house, the grandchildren running through the garden, laughter echoing from the kitchen where my daughter would help me prepare lunch. She had told me the night before, "I'll come by around 10, Mom." maybe we can sit outside and chat for a while." So, I woke up early. I picked out a blouse she had given me a few birthdays ago, the soft blue one with tiny white flowers. I combed my hair carefully, making sure it was neat, just the way she used to admire when she was younger and would sit beside me, playing with my hair like she did when she was a child. At 9:45, I sat by the window, watching the entrance. At 10 o'clock, I told myself, she's just running a little late. At 10:30, I thought, maybe traffic is bad today. At 11 o'clock, I stared at the door, willing it to open. At 11:30, I knew she wasn't coming. I tried not to be upset. I told myself that she had a busy life, her work, her children, the endless responsibilities that made time slip through her fingers like sand. I told myself she would call later, maybe explain, maybe promise to come next time. But she didn't. And that was the first time I truly understood the pain of feeling forgotten. The world moves on without you. When I first moved into the nursing home, my family visited often. My daughter came once a week, my son every other weekend. My grandchildren would stop by, their young faces full of energy, filling the space with stories from school, new games they had learned, things that made their world spin faster than mine. At first, I felt connected, as if I was still a part of their lives. They would ask about my days, tell me about theirs, and for those brief moments, I could pretend nothing had changed. But time has a way of shifting things, of pulling people in different directions, of making distance feel natural even when you never intended it to be. The visits became less frequent. First, my grandchildren got busier with school, with friends. They meant well. "We'll visit soon, Grandma." But soon turned into weeks, then months. My son, always so busy with work, started calling instead of coming. At first, I cherished those phone calls, but as time went on, they felt more like obligations than conversations. "Hey, Mom, just checking in. Everything okay?" He would ask, his voice rushed, his attention split. I would tell him I was fine, because what else could I say? Then, there were the holidays. At home, holidays meant warmth, the smell of home-cooked meals filling the air, my family gathered around, sharing laughter, passing dishes, making memories. In the nursing home, holidays were different. I would watch other residents, dressed in their best, waiting by the door, eyes full of hope. Some were lucky. Their families came, sweeping them away for a few hours of celebration. Others, like me, waited in vain. The staff would smile kindly, saying, "Maybe next time." I told myself I was being selfish, that I should be grateful for the visits I did get. But gratitude doesn't erase loneliness. And when you're out of sight, it's easier than you think to become out of mind. The silence that follows. Loneliness isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just the quiet hum of a room that used to be filled with conversation, the empty chair across from you at dinner, the silence that stretches too long between phone calls. There's a kind of loneliness that sneaks up on you, settling in like an old coat, familiar yet heavy. It's in the way you stop expecting visitors, the way you start pretending you don't mind being alone, the way you hesitate before calling someone because you don't want to be a burden. I remember one evening, sitting in my room, my fingers hovering over my phone. I wanted to call my son. I wanted to hear his voice, to ask how his day was, to remind him that I was still here. But I hesitated. Would he be busy? Would he sigh when he saw my name on the screen thinking, "I'll call her back later"? I didn't want to feel like I was forcing myself into his day, so I put the phone down. That night, I stared at the ceiling, wondering when it happened, when I went from being the center of my family's world to a footnote in their busy lives. The loneliness no one talks about, people assume that loneliness in old age is about being alone. But it's more than that. It's feeling like you no longer belong in the lives of the people you love. It's watching from the sidelines, knowing they are moving forward while you are standing still. It's realizing that the stories you want to tell, The memories you want to share are trapped inside you because there's no one there to listen. They say that life goes on, but what they don't say is how it feels, hosti, to watch it go on without you. If you're considering a nursing home, if you are thinking about moving into a nursing home, or if you have a loved one who is, I want you to ask yourself this: are you prepared for the loneliness? Because no matter how much your family loves you, no matter how much they promise to visit, life has a way of making people forget. And when you're sitting in a quiet room, staring at the door, waiting for someone who may never come, you'll understand loneliness isn't just about being alone, it's about feeling forgotten. And that, perhaps, is the hardest pain of all. Number 3, the struggle to find purpose. The struggle to find purpose. When I first moved into the nursing home, I thought I was just changing where I lived. I didn't realize I was also changing why I lived. At home, my days had meaning, even in the smallest ways. I had my routines, waking up early to water the garden, making my own coffee just the way I liked it, folding my laundry with care, arranging fresh flowers on the table to brighten the room. These small acts weren't just chores, they were part of who I was. They gave me a sense of control, of contribution. They reminded me that I mattered. But when I moved into the nursing home, those routines disappeared. Meals were brought to me, laundry was done by someone else, and the plants, well, they weren't mine to care for anymore. I told myself that it would be nice, that after decades of responsibilities, I could finally relax. But what I didn't realize was how empty life feels when you no longer have a reason to get up in the morning, the days that stretch too long. In the beginning, I tried to keep busy. I told myself I would join the activities, arts and crafts, music sessions, book clubs, but they weren't the same. At home, I cooked because I wanted to, not because it was scheduled on a weekly activity list. I read because I chose a book I loved, not because it was handed to me as part of a reading hour. Here, everything felt like a pastime rather than a purpose. And the days, oh, how they stretched. I had never noticed time moving so slowly before. Back home, there was always something to do, something that needed my attention. But in the nursing home, once breakfast was over, the rest of the day yawned ahead, empty and long. I watched other residents fall into the same pattern. In the morning, we would sit in the lounge exchanging small talk that rarely went beyond the weather or what was on the menu for lunch. In the afternoons, some dozed off in their chairs, their hands folded neatly in their laps. Others sat in silence, watching television, not really paying attention. And I wondered, is this what the rest of my life will be? Just passing time until the day is done? Losing the things that make you feel alive. I met a man named George not long after I moved in. George was 84, a carpenter for most of his life. Back home, his garage was his sanctuary, a place filled with tools, wood shavings, and half-finished projects that he poured his heart into. He had built everything from furniture to birdhouses, even fixing things around the neighborhood just because he loved working with his hands. But here, there were no tools, no workbench, no sense of creation. One afternoon, I found him sitting alone by the window, his hands resting idly on the table. They were strong hands, calloused from years of building and fixing, now still and unused. I sat beside him and asked, "Do you miss it?" He looked down at his hands, flexing his fingers slowly. "I feel useless," he admitted. "I used to build things. I used to be needed. Now, I just sit here." I knew exactly what he meant. Purpose isn't just about keeping busy. It's about feeling like you matter. And when the things that once gave your life meaning are taken away, what's left? When you no longer feel needed. Perhaps the hardest part of losing purpose is the realization that the world no longer needs you the way it once did. I used to be the person my children called when they needed advice, when they wanted to share their joys and struggles. I was the one who cooked for family gatherings, who made sure birthdays were celebrated, who kept traditions alive. But now, those roles were gone. The meals were still being made, the birthdays still celebrated, but without me at the center of it. My family carried on, as they should, but I felt like I was watching from the outside, no longer part of the rhythm of their lives. One evening, during a phone call, my daughter told me about a big decision she was making at work. I listened, nodded, gave my advice. But when we hung up, I realized something. She had already made her decision before she called me. I wasn't the first person she turned to anymore. And that was when I understood. Losing purpose isn't just about having nothing to do. It's about feeling like you no longer matter in the lives of the people you love, fighting to hold on. I didn't want to disappear into the quiet routine of the nursing home. I didn't want to become one of those residents who just sat, waiting for time to pass. So I tried. I started small, writing letters to my grandchildren, telling them stories from my past. I found joy in seeing their replies, in knowing my words still meant something. I began offering small acts of help, folding napkins in the dining room, helping a new resident settle in, sharing my old recipes with the kitchen staff. They were small things, but they reminded me that I still had something to give. And slowly, I learned. Purpose isn't always about big things. Sometimes it's just about finding a reason to smile, to connect, to feel useful in whatever way you can. If you're considering a nursing home, if you or someone you love is thinking about moving into a nursing home, ask yourself, what gives your life meaning? And will you be able to hold on to it once you're there? Because losing purpose isn't just about boredom. It's about losing a piece of yourself, and finding that piece again is harder than you think. 4. Health decline happens faster than expected. Health decline happens faster than expected. I used to think that growing old was a slow process, something that happened over years, little by little. I thought I would feel it creeping in, first in the way my legs might ache after a long walk, then in how my hands might tremble slightly when I reached for my teacup. I believed that aging was something I could manage, something I could fight against if I just stayed active, if I just kept moving. But I was wrong. Aging isn't just about time, it's about use. And the moment you stop using your body, the moment you stop moving the way you used to, something changes. It doesn't take years, it takes months, sometimes even weeks. I didn't realize how quickly I would grow weaker after moving into the nursing home. I didn't expect how soon I would struggle with things that had once been effortless. And I wasn't the only one. The subtle shift. From strength to frailty. Back home, I was never an athlete, but I stayed active in my own way. I walked to the market every other day, carrying my own bags. I stretched every morning, bending down to touch my toes, reaching my arms up toward the ceiling. I stood in my kitchen for hours at a time, chopping vegetables, stirring pots, moving from counter to table with ease. And then I moved here. At first, it seemed like a relief. I didn't have to cook anymore, didn't have to clean, didn't even have to walk far to get from my bed to the dining area. Everything was designed to be easier, more convenient. I told myself that I was just resting, that I had earned this time to relax. But what I didn't realize was that the less you do, the less you can do. The first signs of weakness. It started small. One morning I noticed that getting out of bed felt different, not painful, not difficult, just slower. I had to push a little harder, brace myself a little longer before standing. Then, when I reached for the railing in the hallway, I was surprised at how much I needed it. A few weeks later, I tried to open a jar of jam that my daughter had brought me. My fingers wrapped around the lid, but no matter how hard I twisted, it wouldn't budge. My hands, once strong from years of kneading dough and scrubbing floors, now trembled under the effort. And then came the moment that shook me the most. One afternoon, I decided to take a walk in the courtyard. It wasn't far, just a few steps outside, a short path around the garden. But by the time I reached the bench, my legs felt tired. My breath came a little faster. I sat down, waiting for the feeling to pass. It never used to feel like this. I thought it was just an off day. But then it happened again and again. I wasn't tired because I was sick. I wasn't out of breath because something was wrong with me. I was tired because I wasn't using my body anymore. Watching others fade. I wasn't the only one. I saw it in Alice, the woman who had arrived at the nursing home just a few weeks before me. She was lively at first, walking the halls confidently, chatting with everyone. She even joked about how she wasn't ready to slow down just yet. But slowly, she did. One day, she started using a walker. Just for balance, she said. A month later, she used it all the time. Then, one morning, I saw her being wheeled into the dining room in a wheelchair. I remember the look on her face, not sadness, not fear, just quiet resignation. She had stopped walking not because she couldn't, but because it was easier not to. And once you stop, it's hard to start again. The trap of comfort. The nursing home is designed for ease. That's what they tell you when you move in, that you don't have to worry anymore, that everything is taken care of. But convenience is not always kindness. The more they do for you, the less you do for yourself. You don't have to walk to get your meals. They bring them to you. You don't have to stand to shower. There's a seat for that. You don't even have to dress yourself if you don't want to. Someone is always there to help. And little by little, without realizing it, you stop using the muscles that once carried you through life. Until one day, you reach for something and find that you can't lift it. Or you stand up only to realize that your legs are too weak to hold you. Or you take a step and feel yourself stumble because your balance isn't what it used to be. That's how it happens. Not all at once, not in dramatic ways, but slowly, quietly, day by day, until one day you wake up and realize that the body you once trusted no longer trusts you. Movement is survival. If I had known how quickly my strength would fade, I would have fought harder to keep it. I would have stood up more often, walked farther, stretched longer, because the truth is, the moment you stop moving is the moment your body starts giving up. Doctors say that muscle loss in old age is normal, but what's not normal is losing it so fast. And that's what happens in nursing homes, where ease replaces effort. It's not the years that make us weaker, it's the lack of use. I have learned that movement isn't just about staying fit. Movement is survival. If you're considering a nursing home, if you're thinking about moving into a nursing home, ask yourself, will you still have the motivation to keep your body strong when everything around you is designed to make life effortless? Because once you slow down, getting back up isn't as easy as you think. And the longer you stay still, the harder it becomes to move again. 5. The loss of privacy and dignity. The loss of privacy and dignity. I never thought much about privacy until I lost it. At home, it was something so natural, so unquestioned. The ability to close my bedroom door when I needed a moment alone. The simple act of choosing when to take a bath, when to get dressed, when to sit in silence without interruption. It wasn't something I ever had to ask for. It was just part of life, part of being an adult, part of being me. But when I moved into the nursing home, I quickly realized that privacy was no longer mine to control. It started on my very first morning. I was still adjusting to my new room, still trying to make sense of my surroundings, when the door suddenly swung open. A nurse stepped in, cheerful and efficient, ready to assist me with my morning routine. "Good morning, Mrs. Land. Time to get up and dressed." I blinked, startled. She wasn't being rude. She was just doing her job. But something about it felt wrong. I wasn't used to someone walking into my room without knocking, without waiting for my permission. At home, my bedroom was my sanctuary. Here, it felt like a space I was borrowing, one that could be entered at any moment, whether I was ready or not. When your body is no longer yours. One of the hardest things to accept was how much of my independence was tied to my physical privacy. At home, I bathed when I wanted. I took my time, enjoying the warm water, letting it soothe my aching joints. If I didn't feel like showering one day, I didn't have to. But in the nursing home, bathing was scheduled. Tuesday and Friday are your bath days, they told me. If you need help, just press the call button. At first, I insisted I could do it myself. I wasn't helpless, after all. But the bathroom was small, the tiles slippery, and soon, they convinced me that it was safer to let someone assist me. The first time it happened, I felt exposed in a way I never had before. A stranger, even a kind one, helping me with something so deeply personal. It felt like I had lost a piece of myself. I wanted to tell them I could do it alone, but the truth was, I wasn't sure anymore. I had started doubting my own strength, and so I let them help. I told myself it was just another part of aging, that I had to accept it. But inside, I felt something I couldn't quite put into words, something that felt like shame. The humiliation of asking for help. It's not just the big things, the bathing, the dressing, the medical care. It's the small things, the everyday things, that remind you that your body is no longer entirely yours. Need to use the restroom? Sometimes you have to press a button and wait. I'll never forget the first time I had to do it. I had been holding it in, hoping I could manage on my own, but my legs felt weak that day. Finally, I pressed the call button, and I waited. And waited. It wasn't the nurse's fault. She had other residents to care for, other needs to attend to. But by the time she arrived, I had already felt the sting of humiliation settle in my chest. "I'm sorry to keep you waiting," she said kindly. I forced a smile. "It's fine," I murmured. But it wasn't fine. I had spent my entire life taking care of myself, handling my own needs. And now, something as simple as using the restroom was dependent on someone else's schedule. That's when I realized, losing privacy isn't just about physical space. It's about losing control over your own body. Shared spaces, shared lives. And then there was my roommate. Not everyone gets a private room in a nursing home. In fact, most people don't. I was lucky. My roommate, Mrs. Fuang, was a quiet woman, polite and reserved. But even with a kind roommate, sharing a space means giving up a part of yourself. There were nights when I just wanted to sit in silence, to be alone with my thoughts. But in a shared room, silence isn't always yours to have. There were mornings when I wanted to sleep in, but I woke up instead to the sound of her television, or the nurse checking her vitals, or the rustling of her getting dressed. There were moments when I wanted to cry, to let out the loneliness I felt, but I held it in because I didn't want her to hear. Even the walls weren't truly mine. At home, I had photographs, paintings, little decorations that made a space mine. Here, I had a single nightstand, a small dresser, and a limited amount of space to hold onto pieces of my past. And no matter how much I tried to make it feel like home, it wasn't. The dignity that slips away. Dignity is a quiet thing. You don't notice it when you have it, but you feel its absence when it's gone. Dignity is choosing what you want to wear, not being handed a set of clothes because it's easier to put on. Dignity is eating what you crave, not what has been portioned onto a tray for you. Dignity is going to bed when you decide, not when the lights are turned off for the night. Dignity is feeling like a person, not a patient. And that's what so many people don't realize about nursing homes. They provide care, yes, they provide safety. But what they don't always provide is the ability to live on your own terms. If you're considering a nursing home, before you move into a nursing home, ask yourself, are you ready to have someone decide when you wake up, when you eat, when you bathe? Are you ready to share your space, to lose the quiet moments of solitude you once had? Are you ready to ask for help for things you never imagined needing help with? Because once you step through that door, privacy is no longer something you choose. It's something you ask for. And dignity, that's something you have to fight to hold on to. Number 6, leaving is harder than you think. Leaving is harder than you think. When I first moved into the nursing home, I told myself it was just temporary. I convinced myself that I would give it a try, see how it felt, and if I didn't like it, I could always go back home. My children reassured me, saying, "If it doesn't work out, we'll figure something else out." I believed them. I believed that if I ever wanted to leave, I could just pack my bags and walk out the door. But what I didn't realize was that once you move into a nursing home, leaving isn't as simple as it sounds. At first, I didn't even think about it much. I was too busy adjusting, too busy trying to make sense of my new routine. But as the weeks turned into months, as the loneliness settled in, as my body grew weaker from doing less, I started longing for home. I missed my kitchen, the sound of the kettle whistling in the morning. I missed my chair by the window, where I used to sit and watch the world outside. I missed the feeling of belonging, of knowing that I could move through my own space freely without needing permission. So one day, I told my daughter, "I want to go home." She hesitated. "Are you sure, Mom? You've been here for a while now. Are you strong enough to live alone?" I wasn't expecting that question. I had been strong enough before I moved in, but was I still? That's when I realized I wasn't sure anymore. The home that no longer feels like yours. I had assumed my house would always be there, waiting for me. But while I was in the nursing home, life outside kept moving. My daughter had started making changes, thinking she was helping. She rearranged furniture to make things easier for me. She donated some of my clothes, saying, "You don't need these anymore." Some of my belongings had been put away, some even given to other family members. And then there were the conversations. "Maybe we should rent the house out, Mom. It's too much work to maintain." "If you're thinking about leaving, maybe we should look at assisted living instead. That way, you won't be alone." It was as if my home wasn't truly mine anymore. The physical barriers to leaving. Even if my home had been untouched, I had changed. In the nursing home, I had stopped doing the things I used to. I hadn't cooked a meal in months. I hadn't cleaned, hadn't carried groceries, hadn't walked more than a few steps at a time. And when I thought about going home, I realized I wasn't even sure if I could do those things anymore. Would I be able to climb the stairs? Would I be able to lift a pot to make my own meals? Would I be able to live the life I had before? Doubt crept in. I had never doubted myself before. But the longer I stayed in the nursing home, the harder it became to believe I could go back to how things were. That's the part no one tells you. The more you stay, the harder it is to leave. The financial trap. Then there was the issue of money. Nursing homes aren't cheap. Even though my children help cover the costs, my savings were slowly disappearing. And then my son mentioned something that made my heart sink. "Mom, if you leave now, do you think you'll need to come back later? Because if you do, you might lose your spot here, and then we'd have to start all over." I hadn't thought about that. I hadn't realized that if I left and later needed care again, I might not be able to return to the same place. I might end up somewhere unfamiliar, somewhere worse. And suddenly, leaving didn't feel like freedom anymore. It felt like a risk. The emotional weight of staying. I saw it happen to others too. People who had moved in thinking it was temporary, only to find themselves staying because leaving felt impossible. I met a woman named Mrs. Hoa. She had only planned to stay a few months while recovering from surgery. She told everyone, "I'm going home soon." But months turned into a year. Her family stopped bringing it up. She stopped bringing it up. One day I asked her, "Do you still want to leave?" She sighed, "I don't know anymore. I don't know if I can." And that's when I understood. Most people don't plan to stay in a nursing home forever. But once you're here, leaving becomes harder than you ever imagined. If you're considering a nursing home, before you move in, ask yourself, will your home still be waiting for you if you decide to leave? Will your body still be strong enough to return to the life you had? Will your savings still be there, or will they slowly disappear? Because the biggest truth of all is this: moving in feels like a decision you can reverse. But for most people, it isn't. And once you stay too long, the world outside starts to feel like a place you can never return to. The choice that changes everything. Looking back, I don't regret growing older. I don't regret the wrinkles on my hands, the silver in my hair, or the years that have passed. Age is a privilege. Not everyone gets to see as many sunrises as I have. But what I do regret is believing that a nursing home was my only option. I walked in expecting comfort, safety, and a better quality of life. What I found instead was a world that slowly took away my independence, my privacy, my purpose, and even my sense of self. Does that mean all nursing homes are bad? Not necessarily. Some people truly need the level of care they provide. But before you make that decision, before you or someone you love takes that step, stop and think. Because once you move in, life will never be the same. You will lose your independence. Decisions that once belonged to you will now be dictated by a schedule that isn't yours. Simple freedoms, when to eat, when to sleep, when to step outside, will no longer be yours to control. You will feel forgotten. No matter how much your family loves you, life has a way of moving forward without you. The phone calls will grow shorter, the visits will become less frequent, and slowly, you will become an afterthought in the lives of those you once cared for. You will struggle to find purpose. The routines that once made your days meaningful, cooking, working, tending to a home, will be taken away. And in their absence, time will feel longer, emptier, harder to fill. Your health will decline faster than you expect. The less you move, the weaker you become. The convenience that nursing homes offer comes at a cost, one that most don't realize until it's too late. You will lose your privacy and dignity. Your body will no longer be entirely yours. The moments you once had to yourself will be replaced by check-ins, assistants, and the quiet erosion of personal space. And leaving? It will be harder than you think. The world outside will change while you are inside. Your home may no longer be yours. Your body may no longer be strong enough, and the decision that once felt temporary may slowly become permanent. If I could do it over, I would have fought harder to stay in my own home. I would have explored more ways to get help without giving up my freedom. I would have spoken up, asked more questions, and made sure I truly needed to be there before making such a life-altering move. And if you are facing this decision, if you are standing at the doorway of this choice, I hope you take the time to ask yourself, is this truly what's best for me? Or is it just what seems easiest right now? Because the life you have today, your routines, your independence, your choices, is worth holding on to for as long as you can.